program at the University of Saskatchewan. Chiaka completed her BFA at the University of Calgary in 2012, and prior to that, a BA in English from the University of Waterloo. Chiaka is interested in examining the idea of physical shelter that protects people from immediate physical threats within the environments on the Earth. These threats would include climatic hazards such as sun, heat, rain, cold, wind, and snow, as well as dangers from wildlife. Shelter is one of the most basic human requirements and one that falls beneath the notice of the well-sheltered until all the elements that entail comfortable shelter are, in part, a whole, lacking. Clothing can be conceived as a primary form of shelter for the body. After clothing some kind of structure further removed from the body, then clothing can be considered the next level of physical shelter. Chiaka seeks to link clothing and simple architecture as co-concepts to be examined as she considers how we cover ourselves in the physical environments we traverse. Chiaka.
Thank you all for coming. So sufficient cover is my theme for today. I thought I would just give a little background as to why I came to talk about shelter. I've always been interested in architecture. I'm still interested in architecture. And particularly vernacular architecture is interesting to me. Vernacular architecture can be described as architecture not built by specialists and usually made by the users of it. Vernacular architecture is very responsive to its environment. So, in a case like this image here in New Mexico, there's a lot of sun in this area, desert area, and not a lot of rainfall. So you can see that there are flat roofs to catch rain, if anything. And in the case of Turkey, you can see these sloped roofs tell us that this environment it has more rain, it has more precipitation. So the roofs are designed to keep the rain off of the building. So particularly, I have been interested since starting my program in the informal city. That describes architecture that's unauthorized, architecture that is, as we commonly say, off the grid, meaning that it's architecture that's not serviced by utilities and all of that, that's in a formal, authorized setting. So here's another structure. And so I'm very interested in these kinds of structures because a lot of the globe now lives in informal architecture. A large percentage of the population of the Earth now lives in cities, the majority now, as opposed to rural areas, and people don't all have nice condos or houses to live in, but have to go to the city to find work or find a way to eke out an existence. So people build informally and come up with basic shelters for themselves to live in. So as I thought back about it, one of the things that really, when I started my program, I said what I was going to come in and do was talk about basic things, like talk about some of the things that escape our notice. Not because I'm particularly, what shall I say, sophisticated or adept at ferreting out these things, but quite the converse, actually. I find that I feel myself a simple person in a very complex world. So I thought, well, why don't I start my MFA by thinking about looking at the things that are in our world, that we face in life, but that we take for granted, the simple things, the basic things. So that's how it is that I started with shelter. So this, in the last year of my BFA, I took a history of architecture course, and one of the things we did was look at this group of documentaries called The Places We Live. It's quite, maybe we'll have a chance to look at it later, I'm not sure, but I encourage you to look at it. It's very telling. It's talking about necessary basic shelter around the world and different ways in which people shelter themselves and live. And this is Mumbai, in India, and this is just one example of the many showing that the very dramatic ways in which people have to shelter themselves and have coverage on the earth. So this is from that same documentary. I'm just going to read this out. In 2008, for the first time in history, more people will live in cities than in rural areas. 1/3 of these urban dwellers, more than 1 billion people, live in slums. So what we're looking at here is, this is a very large, unofficial, unauthorized city. So these are all unauthorized architectures. So the United Nations forecasts that the number of slum dwellers will double within the next 25 years. Urban slums are the world's fastest growing human habitat. The United Nations defines slums as poor, overcrowded communities lacking adequate access to safe water and sanitation, public services, basic infrastructure, and quality housing. Slums exist outside the official city grid, built without architects or municipal maps, and are in a constant state of transition. So in addition to this documentary, which had quite a profound effect on myself, that being, I was already always interested in architecture anyway, but this really captured my imagination. Also, just realizing that, feeling my own vulnerability in the sense of what would I do if I didn't have at my disposal all of the things like flick the switch and light comes on, open the tap and water comes on, all those things that we take for granted. What would I do personally? Like, people do face those situations, even in our Western developed, even locally in Canada, people do face those situations. People face, the power grid fails, or there's an ice storm. People do face these things. They tell us to put together emergency packages, but I know I don't have one. I should by the end of this program. I promise I will to myself. But we don't have a clue. If our car breaks down, how many of us have emergency blankets and all those things? Well, we're not really prepared. So I'm really interested in looking at that business as just basically surviving. How does my body survive in an unidealized situation in which I personally and most of us live every day? So I thought I would just go back and just show a few images from my BFA before I launch into more about what I'm doing now. So in my BFA, I was concerned with some social ideas, and I was also concerned especially with my materiality being around used things or recycled materials. That's pretty much how I started working pretty consistently through my BFA, and I've carried that on till today. This piece, which is Untitled, was simply about just about structure and order, and the idea that sometimes less is more, and sometimes restriction and constraint can actually stimulate our imagination. So that was my idea with this piece. So each of these little squares is filled with 8 individual little wooden blocks, and then mesh. The wire is sewn together with the mesh is sewn together with wire, and then wrapped in thread. So I was just thinking about order in this. And in this, I was thinking about our inner and outer life. And again, I use used materials here. The back piece is a quilted piece, a way that I do enjoy working. It's quite a lot larger than the wooden piece. The wooden piece is as big as a tall door, and it was just some floorboards that I found, and glued those together, and then used a router and ground holes, circles into the wood. My idea in this was, I was thinking about speaking to the material of the wood, and thinking about how a tree grows in a very orderly, great fashion, and how I was contrasting that with how that's how we present externally in a very orderly fashion, but internally we go through all kinds of things on a daily, hour by hour basis, all kinds of little chaoses that make up our inner life. But what I was thinking of this is, as we grow, as those rings get larger, we gain more resources in how to order that internal disorder. That's what that piece was about. And then this piece was for a painting class, and we took one thing out of a bag that the instructor handed out. We didn't know what we were picking out of the bag, so we picked something, and we were supposed to develop a painting out of whatever we took out of the bag. I took out of the bag a tea bag, so then I started thinking about tea, and then I started thinking about the colonial history of tea and the colonial history of sugar, and so I went about dyeing this fabric, because I was left with fabric. So I dyed this fabric with, tie-dyed it using tea, and then I was really thinking about my own history, which is I am Trinidadian born, and I was thinking about how sugar and slavery, and so I made this installation talking about the opulence that slave owners and the people in home countries had due to slavery and sugar and tea and all of that, and the whole colonial reality. This cup and teapot were also part of that installation. Just wrapped and sewn in leather and painted gold to refer to the riches and opulence.
Chiaka, I have a question. Were those bullets in the?
Yeah, no, that just,
Okay.
yeah,
Just
they look
curious.
like, right, no, I actually called attention to that when I did the piece, because I did like that reference,
Yeah.
because of the violence
Yeah.
associated, right,
Yeah.
with
the whole
slavery and the whole transatlantic slave trade and slavery and in other places as well, right? Yeah, so it happened to be that the jacket that this was made out of, it just happened to have those elements. It was a decoration on the shoulder or something, and I thought, oh,
Okay.
works, because that's exactly what I was thinking. Thing. So then we started here, and I started to look at a few people who were using clothing, or started thinking of clothing as shelter. So one of the first people I spent some time studying was Lucy Orta, and she imagined that she was creating clothing type shelters for an urban dweller who had to protect themselves from the possible violence of the city. So she had these things that people went out in, and people could respond to them in these things. And this was called Refuge Wear. She did a large series over almost a decade dealing with this. So that was a good jump off for me, because when I started researching, I didn't realize that there were other people working with the idea of clothing as shelter, but I found out there were lots of other people. Anyway, so around that time when I started to do my research, I started to make some objects. This one here is called a barter necklace. So one of the things that I'm imagining often, one of the thoughts that's playing in my mind is the post-apocalyptic scenario. So I thought of making this barter belt. It's barter necklace. It's almost 80 feet long altogether, and it's made of fabric, canvas particularly, and leather sewn together to make this huge circle. And then little blue strips there are leather attachments. And the idea with those is that if you're in a situation where you're bartering, you could trade. What's also part of the necklace is nuts and bolts and those kinds of things. And my idea was you could trade those kinds of things, because in a post-apocalyptic situation, building materials might be a very valuable thing. So you could trade nuts and bolts and such, and then you could add onto the necklace other things that you might acquire that might help you in your quest for shelter. And then you can just add on those things like a screwdriver or a hammer or tape, all things that would be very valuable in that sort of scenario, I imagine. So around that same time, I was also having personal not struggles, but challenges, let's say, around shelter. We were living in an apartment in Sutherland. It was fine enough. It was very dark, It wasn't very comfortable. It didn't feel, I was very aware of my shelter, but not in a positive way in that space. So we had these tiny little windows. Light was a rare commodity, and so these images came out of. I was also taking photography at the time. That was my my discipline that I was new to, that we had to take in the program, which is really a good learning experience. So this is my first attempt at photography using real cameras. So just really trying to talk about how the space feels, how approaching it is, and the level of comfort or lack thereof. But shortly after moving in there, we got another place and we're moving. So that's what those boxes are. And then I had another experience of shelter, which I'll talk about later. So I did this piece here, which I don't have a name for, but it's the idea of a jacket with a helmet-type hood that would potentially protect you against precipitation. So it's an amalgam of two jackets, a jean jacket and another more ornate jacket. And I was cautioned in critique that to be careful not to aestheticize, as I think Joan Forsyth put it, the idea of homelessness. So that became a consideration that I kept in my mind. So then after the comfortable basement apartment, I had to stay with new friends at Cumberland, and this image is just talking about me living out of bags and one little basket of accessories as I did at that time. I was supposed to stay there for a month, and it turned out I was there for 5 months because the house that we bought has to go through a transformation of its own to make it basically livable. So in that same term, we started to do in photography pinhole. And I thought I would, again, talking about the idea of shelter, thinking about our location. So these images are taken between Murray and Place Real. And just the idea that although it's stormy and wintry outside, we've got this value of shelter that we can just look into this landscape, but we're not susceptible to its challenges. So then we were doing the MFA students did a show last year called Nest, and we all had to look at our work and think about how we could all in our work speak to that word, nest. So I thought, oh, that was an easy one for me because I'm doing shelter, so shelter is kind of like nesting. So it's the idea of this piece here is this chair can go out into the environment and allow you to have a certain level of comfort out in the environment. So it's composed of a hood. It's this piece here. It's got a shawl. It's got a shawl attached to it, and it's got also a blanket attached that you can wrap around you or have company with, and you can sit and have a little picnic. So maybe that chair. So I was always being told last year that you need to perform these things. You can't get an idea of what they are just by sitting in a corner. And I resisted that quite a lot because I didn't like to myself as a performer. But I have to thank Amina for these photographs that she took this weekend. Thank you. As I really did actually start to perform the pieces, I saw that really and truly it made more sense when you actually tried to wear it, tried to do something with it that you said it was supposed to be able to do. So this is our lovely house that happened after the apartment, and things were it didn't look like this before we bought it, but anyway. So we had to tear down cupboards and take it back to some level of basic form before it could be livable again. And the cupboards had to be very tough and such. So once again, I was very aware of the reality of my shelter. So I'm just going to talk here about some of the influences that I'm responding to right now. This artist called, let me read her name, I'm sure some of you can pronounce it better than me, Jessica Pope, I think. Anyway, she is an architect first and then an artist. So she works between art and architecture. But what really influences me the most about her is she's an activist artist, and she is, she's not just about making forms, she's about actually making a difference in the environment of what she does. So in collaboration with another architect, she did this dry toilet in Caracas. And I just like that idea. She says that art is supposed to have influence in society. So she uses her art and her architecture together to make a difference in the lives of people on a day-to-day lived basis. So she really inspires us quite a lot. Then there's apparently, I found it this summer, there's a movement for people wanting to live small and wanting to live in smaller spaces, wanting to downsize. And so that's another big influence in mine. It's just the idea. With this one, they claim that 99% of the buildings are salvaged, which of course is amazing. They can actually get a full dwelling out of fully salvaged material. But we have a lot of stuff in the world today, right? So you can see how, that wouldn't be too hard to imagine. So quite a good challenge. Then the whole idea of living small. So this capsule hotel in Japan is, they say that you can rent these capsules nightly, but a lot of people even rent them monthly. So this person was renting his suite for $700 a month, and the story was saying that he had to get cheap accommodations because he was between jobs. But I thought, well, $700 is cheap accommodations, but we're talking about Tokyo. So but this whole idea of just being encapsulated like that and being able to survive in such a very, very small space is very interesting to me. And then the idea of, again, this house for one person, the idea of just enough space for you. And if you were to think of just enough space for yourself, we could probably get rid of a lot of the things that we have if we just thought about what we really need, essentially, more or less essentially to live. And then this idea of traveling accommodation is also very, very interesting for me. So this person, he's a painter, and he also builds these structures. So he's a surfer as well. So he built this structure, so him and his wife and his dog go surfing. If they were far from home, they could sleep in that unit as well. So I think he's in California. He said he's taking us all the way to Nova Scotia.
The structure's in better shape than the car.
Right. He said that the car he bought it from his friend's mother. It had been in a crash, and the whole front, the back top of it was total in this crash. So that's what's fun to do. So this is the piece, my most recent piece, and just again taking up this idea of having what you basically need and being able to be mobile with it. So this is a portable bed, and you can go into the environment with it. You can carry it without too much difficulty. It has straps as well, you can strap it on your back. So, strap as well. Very comfortable. Not much hard to carry on the back. It's just me traversing the campus spaces with my bag. Got a few funny looks. So I'm continuing with this whole idea of just using found materials. That's a very strong part of what I'm trying to do with my work, just not having to buy a lot of new things, or if I buy things, just things that So I don't know, does anybody have questions at this point? Comments or anything?
I found all the images of you interacting with your work to be very interesting. Enjoying your sort of almost the formative process of it.
I think I tried my best to avoid it. But yeah, it was fun once I did it. It wasn't too bad.
Chiaka. Oh, sorry,
ahead,
somebody
Chiaka.
else.
Oh.
I love the way you're looking at all these other geographies in global corporate capitalism, like
Yeah.
the plantation.
Right.
And I really love these staged photographs, like your portable bed
Right, okay.
journey. And I think one of the things I really love about it is that it's beautiful too. Like I know, so my question is about poverty aesthetics. Like I know if people make poverty aesthetic,
Right.
that they come in for huge critiques. Like who was the one who, was it the Southern Wilds? What's that movie where they have, it's a,
How to look at pictures.
no, the one with the child who's in the Southern Wilds. That's right. Got incredibly blasted because it aestheticized poverty.
Right.
But then on the other hand, somebody like Brutinsky uses beauty very politically, and you're seduced in and then you're shocked. So I actually think it's, well, what do you think about that? I think it's quite complicated. Like I'm so attracted to these stage photographers because I'm looking at the patterns and the colors, and then I think about what you're actually performing.
Right. Well, I think, well, the context of people making things out of whatever the situation is, that's kind of, the aesthetics is a human reality, and I think I've seen lots of spaces and things that were made with people with impoverished means that were beautiful. So that's what I guess I would say, that's how I've thought about that, because at the beginning I was thinking, oh, okay,
Yes.
maybe I shouldn't make
No,
it.
it's something to think about, like
Right.
the Julie Dash, Daughters of the
Yeah,
Dust.
yeah.
That is exquisitely beautiful, and it's about, it is about using scraps
Right, yeah. Yeah.
and making these, the inhabitation of these other spaces.
I'm very attracted to that, the
Yes,
idea of just
yeah.
using scraps, because we have a lot of,
Yes,
there's just a lot to work from, right?
yes, it's
So-
it's a very amazing politic you're developing here. But I think the critique of beauty in that is much more complicated than,
Right.
say, the reception of, was it Beasts of the Southern Wild, or with the
Yeah.
young girl?
Yeah.
Which I think was beautiful.
It was stunning, and
It
it
was
was,
so
and if you
stunning.
read the reception, like, just go online and read it, they just slammed it for making this utterly, desperate situation beautiful. And there's a there's a politic in that. It's just complicated.
Yeah,
It's-
yes.
have a look at that.
And
Yeah.
it kind of led into my question, which was that image of you in the hallway with the stripes and then the white sort of
Yeah.
architecture that surrounds, I find really compelling.
Yeah, see,
And potentially without the beauty,
yeah.
maybe we wouldn't see the layers or wouldn't spend enough time. And it wouldn't be as contemplative potentially. But I do think it's, there's funny lines. I think Bertinsky's a really good example too. Without the seduction, it'd be off-putting. We might shut off.
Right.
And so that level of engagement might be necessary in order for the other to unfold.
Right, yeah. Well, that's a good thing to think about, then I feel, I like that.
And I also liked the one where you were wearing your jacket, but you had, the patterns from Trinidad as well.
Exactly.
I think that was, I
Yes.
loved the
Yes.
sort of eclecticism of that.
And the
yeah,
use of
anyways,
colour.
I think-
Yeah.
I have a question. I know in the past we've talked a little bit about defining what that future might be.
Yes.
And I guess in a way that this leads, or some of the comments previous to this leads into the possibility that if you were to define what that future apocalyptic thing would be, then that would allow you to make it as aesthetic as you want to, because
Right.
it's a fictitious future,
Okay, right.
as opposed to one that we all imagine as a possibility, but rather a fictitious one.
Right, yeah. I think I hooked into that last year quite a lot, the idea that it doesn't have to be, Graham used to knock me on this hall. Would it really function? Well, no, it wouldn't. But then maybe it's okay. I took liberty from that and I said, well, it's okay that it doesn't really function. I want to talk about the idea, and I want to make these forms talking about the idea using.
Well, wouldn't it be interesting
Mhm.
to actually create your own story as
Yes.
to what that would be, and then all the things that might spawn from that, and it would allow you to be as aesthetic as you want to, because
Right.
it's fictitious,
Yeah,
the story.
I think that's a good. Yeah, that's a good possibility. Yeah.
The question of function is interesting to me, and I'm coming back to your work fresh, but maybe it raises the question of integrity and authenticity. Like, does that become a part of it having to function in any way for you?
Well, again, I just think right now I'm taking the liberty that the idea has to be there. I want to be able to convey the idea of a portable bed, for example, but would this really, really function? Right now, I haven't interrogated that need to have it function. Right now, I'm saying I'm still in that fantasy. But if it's just the idea, you know, so yeah, there's a level of functionality, but you know, it doesn't have to be completely rigorous. Because I'm more interested in just the idea of, you know, the idea. But I mean, I think when people, whatever situation people have to live in, they bring, that's a human thing that we bring to our reality. We bring aesthetics into whatever we're faced with, whatever we have to work with, I think. So.
I think the compositions are determined enough that we see formally that construction exists. And so our imaginative leap as a viewer takes us into this construction, I believe, right away. And I feel that it's personalized enough in languages that you're finding that are your own experience. And so I think we can see that when we're looking at just the image and the aesthetic of the photographs in the rooms. We start to know that information through your story.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment. I think specificity is definitely the place that I work from. Like, I don't work from wanting to be general, I'm looking at. But like you're saying, Alison, maybe, I haven't really gotten to the point of naming a particular person in the environment, but it's specific in the sense of, well, if I was in a situation, I had to make something, and these were my resources, this is what I would do. So, you know, so that's, and I mean, my idea with art generally is that it starts from my specific voice. That's how I work as an artist. Like, I'm not trying to be universal in any way. I'm trying to say, I'm a human person that's going to resonate with lots of other human people. So if I speak specifically to the way I see things, then it's going to, then that's where I think the resonance will come from.
As I said, I really love the cartographic gaze in your work, the way you kind of move between, like, all these other spaces, like the basement flat, and I wrote them down, but I can't read them now, but I had a whole list of them. The slum, I was starting with your work, the plantation, and that was very interesting, because part of your work is about placemaking, isn't it? That's what your gestures are all about.
Yeah, that was the first thing I said about my work when I started last year, is I'm interested in talking about place. And then that was interrogated, and I realized, well, maybe I'm talking about something smaller than place. But maybe I'll work from small and go bigger, but it's always about.
But I actually loved, what you do with it is quite different, but I actually loved the way you made me think about hidden geographies, and as Alison said, one of them is the apocalyptic landscape, which is so interesting because it's a horizontal gaze there, isn't it? It's not these vertical ones of the colonized world that in which I include global corporate capitalism. But that's.
I like the personal and the way that you sort of went into your basement apartment and we're thinking about how that functions for you and how it doesn't function, how it doesn't work well. I think
Yeah.
that's really interesting when you bring your autobiography to it.
Right.
Yeah.
I think I'm getting that a lot of that comes from your class, but
Oh.
actually, when you say, a lot of that comes from
Yeah.
that
I
idea.
facetiously was thinking, can there be a side rum shack connected to something?
No, but-
But you've got a kind of a filmic gaze. You've got that kind of satellite gaze that's moving, and then you come in close too. And I'm liking all of those different gazes. So
Yeah, well, that just encourages me to just think about that. I wasn't thinking that specifically
Yeah.
about it, but yeah, give me something to think
I think you showed us some very interesting source material too. You know, in this talk, I really enjoyed the breadth of the stuff you were showing, and its relationship you can really see to your work.
Yeah, there's a lot of people dealing with architecture as, art to architecture.
yes, it's
Talking
really
about
exciting, isn't
Politics
it?
of
Yeah.
architecture.
Yeah.
It is. I had no idea until last year, really.
This piece reminds me a little bit of Rebecca Belmore's
Pardon?
bed piece.
Yes.
It reminds me of Rebecca Belmore's bed piece at the, where is it? Oakville Galleries, the outside. There was
Okay, I don't know it.
it was one of the galleries that existed, its history existed, and she dealt with that and did something of her own within it. And she slept in the bed of this building that,
Oh, that was in the Grange.
In the
at
Grange.
AGO.
okay, yeah.
And then she did another version of that outside the VAG when that dealer of hers was wanting to sue her. And so her response was the indigenous
Oh,
gift
yes.
giving, to give everything away.
More
And
than
part
that,
of
yeah.
it was, you can go online, it's a performance where she actually, she does unfurl, I think it's that piece on the ground and lies on it. And then she rolls it up and gives it to the VAG curator. I might be remembering differently, but yes, those are, and it's, so your work is really doing interesting work here, because it's this, it has the power to make us associate, to think of other spaces and places.
There's just so much when you start to think about the politics that are involved in space. And you can be where, and how you can be absent in one place and over visible in another place,
Mhm.
So.
And just how geographies themselves are hidden in dominant discourses.
So you did something very gutsy with the bed piece, and you decided to
Yeah.
camp out not in a corner somewhere, but right in the middle
Yeah,
of the
well,
hall.
it
That was the
Sunday
most
afternoon.
conspicuous space you could choose.
It was Sunday afternoon. I kept saying to him, "This is the best. There's nobody here." Like if it was a regular day, what is it? I found the corner. Well,
We'll talk about that
The things
forever.
there, because those tunnels, on the weekends, are full of photographers photographing families.
Yeah.
So there was a family getting photographed when we went, and I think they looked over and then.
Oh, did you take the photograph? Oh, you did, so it's a collaboration. Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Would you do that off campus?
Yeah,
In as
definitely. We
conspicuous
talked
a
about
way?
Yeah, I think,
Downtown,
as
in the
we-
middle of the sidewalk on a
we
crowded
talked about it,
Saturday or
right?
something?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I made two of these beds, and so I was talking to Alma that I think one of them I'll keep pristine in my studio. The other one I will take it out and city sometime, see what happens, see what it looks like.
You know what you're doing that's so interesting. Traditional art history, and particularly when it got gender analysis, it began to be very interested in the figure of the flaneur, that is so key in modernness. And it's so interesting how artists are reworking that, with your walking, you're moving through space, how to do that differently. So the original one was the one imagined in Baudelaire's text in Paris in the 1800s. So it's walking through the arcades, but it's a very privileged white male body. And then the gendered analysis said, well, where's the flaneurs? And then people like Jimmy Yoon, she actually did this performance piece around Seoul in Korea, right?
Korea, yes.
Where she's from. And she actually it was an amazing gutsy piece. She lay on kind of, a skateboarder's thing and moved herself through the city, low down on her stomach, and people filmed it, and nobody looked at her. And her point was that all of the veterans in the Korean War are invisible in that geography. So it was just, and I was thinking that was such another way to perform this figure. It's appropriating the figure of the flaneur bodies who move through space, and then how to do it differently.
I'm really picking up on that from our class this term too, is that idea of appropriating a term or a position that has been used oppressively and reconfiguring. So I really like that idea that you were proposing. So think about how that could be relevant.
What's coming next?
What I really want to do is build some little structures. Like that would be hard structures. They're just like they do it for one body
And more like the Lucy Orta approach to
combining
the clothes with architecture through
Right.
tent-like structures.
Right. I'm thinking. I really want to. I've been working too much with soft materials. I really want to see about working with hard things. That's the only stipulation I think I have. I want to work with hard materials.
Did you see any of? Did you see any of Tyler Brett's installation works that he did with TNT?
Yeah, he was in our class last year.
No, he did a presentation in our presentation.
He was in class, right? He came to do a presentation with that lady.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like he did a lot of prints on the Illustrator and stuff, but him and his partner used to create actual stuff that I really like.
Yeah. It's kind of like him and stuff. So
Yeah, sort of post-apocalyptic structure.
So will mobility be something that you'll consider for that? Seems to be an important thing for you. Mobility.
It is.
And being able to carry whatever it is.
Yeah, it is. Because it's the idea of either there's the slum or there's the idea of that person who, I was thinking about it today, I was thinking about that, if you've got architectures that are totable, then you never have to be susceptible to the slum, right? You can always be somewhere else. You could go and be in the arcade, at least for some of the time, and move when somebody...
So your future is nomadic.
There's a lot of that. Yeah, there's a lot of that.
But it kind of decenters that nomadic gaze, which is often performed in a very privileged way, and assumes that all bodies can be mobile and move through space, whereas in fact some bodies cannot even cross a border, or cannot occupy. There are spaces that are off limits. And,
I think so. People that don't have the right of mobility, people that are diasporic in ways not of their own choosing.
yeah, where a few yards across a border is like a world that cannot be achieved. Yeah.
Just a thought in terms of Nan's comment, have you thought of going the opposite way and almost make it so that it's anti-mobile, so that it actually is so exaggerated that you can't move it or drag it, or a bed so long or heavy or whatever that it can't be,
That's nice.
and how that changes how that piece reads, I guess.
Okay,
So you always think place and displacement together,
Right.
which is actually how the language works.
I like that.
Yeah,
It's kind of
nice.
disabling, right? As a,
Right.
Yes.
So as opposed to any.
Yes.
As a contrast.
Yeah, as a mix, yes.
In order to exaggerate one, you have a contrast. on the other
Yes.
side.
I
Yes.
like that a lot, actually.
Home, unhome,
Unhome, yeah.
place, displaced. Yeah.
Unhome, that's good.
Unhomed, unhomely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the comments.
So she wants more.